This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to call the June 8th FAMPO Technical Committee meeting to order. Let me read the disclaimer for the virtual meeting. Unless otherwise indicated, due to the nature of the declaration of a state of emergency due to novel coronavirus, COVID-19, pursuant to Code Section 2.2-3708.2, this meeting is to be held by electronic communications via the web platform GoToMeeting. The catastrophic nature of this declared emergency makes it impracticable and unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and the purpose of this meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body. I'm glad I remembered to do that this time. Okay. Stacy, would you call the roll so we can determine a quorum?
Sure. From the city of Fredericksburg, Eric Nelson.
Here.
Bassam Amin. Paul Agnello from Spotsylvania.
Present.
Rodney White.
Present.
Wanda Parrish. Leon Hughes. Nick Miner from King George. Kimberly Wilson. From Stafford, Alexander Osiak.
Here.
Brian Council. Jason Towery.
Here.
From Caroline, Mike Fincham. Craig Pennington. From PRTC, Charles Steigerwald.
Here.
From DRPT, Sierra Williams.
Here.
Todd Horsley. From Fred, Jamie Jackson.
Here.
Craig Reed.
Here.
From VRE, Sonali Soneji.
And Christine Hefner is here for Sonali.
Okay, thank you. From Federal Highway, Ivan Rucker. From GW Ride Connect, Lee Anderson.
Here.
Kate Gibson. Linda Millsaps.
Here.
From VDOT, Michelle Shropshire.
Here.
Stephen Haynes.
Here.
Jim Ponticello.
Here.
Dan Grinnell. And we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Stacy. Let's press on to approval of the Tech Committee agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll call the agenda approved. Pressing on to public comment, are there any members of the public who are present at this virtual meeting who would like to speak? Anyone present? Hearing none, we'll press on. Number 5, discussion, action items. 5A is the allocation of CMAQ and Rstp funds. This has been a subject of considerable discussion. I know there has been concern expressed about funding for GW Ride Connect. I would like to assure everybody that the Tech Committee has committed to funding or ensuring that GW Ride Connect is a part of the overall transportation network. We committed to that several years ago, and that commitment hasn't wavered. What we are, however, is talking about potential other funding, because when we made that commitment, 5307 money wasn't available, et cetera. So it's part of the discussion, but it is not by any means an attempt to somehow curtail or compromise the good work that GW Ride Connect does. Having said that, let's press on to 5A1, UPC 110987, Route 208 Hood Drive, CMAQ STBG Rstp transfer request. Paul, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. We have a transfer request for UPC 110987, which is the Route 208 Hood Drive project. It was rated for both CMAQ and STBG RSTP funding. The transfer request is in the amount of $772,500, which equates to 15% of the original $5.15 million project budget. We basically request TAC action on this today. The transfer request would help Spotsylvania develop the required funding to meet the new higher VDOT cost estimate of about $6.3 million, and the county would assume the remaining responsibility for the project. I'll say that the funding for the project needs to be no later than FY23. We would like to use CMAQ first to the extent possible, and then use STBG RSTP to fill in the gap that's not able to be filled by CMAQ. I'll say that we do in the meeting packet have details on the VDOT cost estimates. I would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Paul?
Yeah, this is Chuck. Just kind of have a general question, because I'm a little confused, and of course I don't always come to the TAC, so you may have to catch me up on some things. But in your introduction, Eric, you mentioned the availability of the 5307 funds in light of the GW Ride Connect, to almost as if the plan was to replace the CMAQ funding for Ride Connect with 5307 funds. And, it's not clear, although all of the transfers that are listed throughout our discussion today would pull that funding, the CMAQ funding, from GW Ride Connect. And although that the TAC has said we support that program, we seem to be pulling that amount of funding from the program with no replacement. So I'm a little confused by that, and maybe somebody can catch me up on where the 5307 comes in.
Yeah, that's a good question, Chuck. I'll leave it to others to talk about the 5307, but we recognize the optics of this, which looks like which doesn't make the replacement clear. My suggestion would be that until we make the replacement clear, that we not necessarily pull this funding, but we have to be. We're trying to do a lot of things in a short amount of time with this kind of awkward format. So that's a question we all have, how to make that clear. Can anybody answer the 5307? Paul, do you have any insight on the 5307?
So I'll make a couple comments. One is basically that 5307 is a new funding source that GWC will be receiving in the near future. I'll say that the funding can be used for MPO staff or FAMPO staff. I'll say that in the past, some of the GW Ride Connect staff have done work for FAMPO, so I could directly go to GW Ride Connect if they were basically doing work for FAMPO. Another just couple thoughts just to kind of help GWC as it considers this kind of funding possibilities. If FAMPO positions are filled, right now there are a number of vacancies, and I'll say that 5307 funding could help with that. I'll say that there's also a lot of unused PL and 5303 funding. But I'll say if those positions are filled, that can generate more indirect funds for GWC, that staff that charge indirect basically have available to charge to, and then maybe they would not need to charge to CMAQ or to 5303 or PL. And specifically, I'm thinking like the FAMPO administrator position. There's some other planning positions that have been vacant for a while. I know that there's discussion of maybe laying off one of the FAMPO staff people, which I'll say that Spotsylvania does not support that, but basically if that were to happen, it seems like that would further create problems because basically those FAMPO staff, when they work, they pay into the indirect. It goes to pay basically a number of the GWC staff salaries who basically don't always have 100% grant funding to charge to. So those are some ideas, and I'll say with the PL and the 5303, GW Ride Connect staff could potentially charge to that as well if they were doing work for FAMPO, which has occurred at some points in the past. I know that with the PL and 5303, there's a pretty sizable surplus that will be carrying over basically from FY20 to 21. I don't have that exact figure kind of in front of me, but I think it's at least a few $100,000 in additional funding. I know in the FAMPO basically draft UPWP, the total amount of funding for staff I think is close to $900,000, and if you include the rural SPR in that, it's kind of pushing closer to $1 million. There is also the Rstp funding for the LRTP, which Spotsylvania supports, some of that being used for staff, for basically GWC to use basically for FAMPO staffing. That has $200,000. We don't support using all that funding for a consultant. We would like to see maybe at least $100,000 of that go towards FAMPO staffing. I think right now the FAMPO UPWP and the GWC budget do not assume that. So that is something that would help. I said that we would also support just flexibility with that RSTP funding, the $200,000 for FAMPO and the $125,000 for GW Ride Connect for FY21 to have GWC have the ability to have that funding through FY22. So if it wasn't all spent in FY21, they could use it in FY22. I'll say that we basically did take a look at the GW Ride Connect spending on CMAQ kind of for FY20 because of the questions that we saw in the emails on Friday. And it appears based on the evidence that basically we have that GWC only spent about half of the CMAQ, or I'll say is projected to spend only about half of that CMAQ for FY20. So I guess we have the question of, does GWC even need kind of that amount of extra funding, $125,000? Maybe half of that, $62,500, is enough. So this is something basically Spotsylvania we're basically willing to work with the TAC and just the MPO process on this, and we want to make sure that GWC is whole and that nobody is laid off because there's not enough funding. But I said that based on what we're seeing on both the FAMPO side and the GW Ride Connect side, we're seeing that there's plenty of funding there for FY21, and we believe also for FY22.
Thank you, Paul. Again, the commitment is there to make sure GW Ride Connect can function, but we're also dealing with a concerted effort by member jurisdictions to make sure that funding that can be used for projects is in fact used for projects. So we have certain competing efforts here. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Linda Millsap. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to weigh in and then see if Mr. Steigerwald can help us anymore with understanding 5307 after me.
Are you representing GW Ride Connect?
I can represent GW Ride Connect or GWRC, whichever works best. Because this is cutting to laying off my employees. So I feel like, as I had requested earlier, that seems like something as a matter of courtesy I would be allowed to address.
GWRC isn't a member of the TAC, but GW Ride Connect certainly is. So please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So
think I should know.
Paul, I appreciate the comments. I'm like, I guess some other folks a little confused because I think our understanding of 5307 funding and the direct conversations we've had makes that TDM support is not an allowable.
So Erica, this is Paul. I just want to basically point out with the FAMPO bylaws,
Hey, Paul,
they state that.
Paul, are you not going to allow me to talk about you wanting to lay off our employees?
Well, I just want to say that with, if we allow you to speak, we're making an exception to the bylaws. The bylaws say that there's one member of GW Right Connect
who is listed as an alternate be allowed to speak.
I can't rap on the table, but knock it off. Linda is speaking as GW Ride Connect, please.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. So I guess the first question that I would like to raise is our understanding is that 5307 funding cannot be used to fund TDM staffing and TDM marketing. Mr. Agnello, perhaps you can enlighten me about how there is already a subrecipient agreement that would allow us to move to the staffing model that you are suggesting. I think that is, that would be crucial to have anything like that done. And in your comments, you're supposing that has already been created, but there's not. So what GW Ride Connect does has, more than 20% of the funding that is used to support GW Ride Connect comes out of our Rstp STBG funds. Now, on Friday and over the weekend, I spoke with some folks, other folks who said they were committed to finding some other sources and looking for some other options. But I think the read that we've been given is moving to 5307 effectively eliminates the funding for the program unless some other moves are made. And this affects 3.6 GWRC staff members. So I don't find that to be insignificant, as it seems to be being brushed off as insignificant. Now, if you want to get into internal staffing decisions at GWRC, I think those are personnel issues. But in terms of overall funding, I would really ask that the TAC consider to continue to do as your chair has suggested and support the GW Ride Connect program. And Mr. Chair, if there are additional questions about what exactly the funds are used for, any questions about that kind of thing, I believe Ms. Kate Gibson and Lee Anderson, who are on here, have also plenty of things to say. Thank you very much for your accommodation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Linda. We appreciate the comments. We really don't want to talk about staffing at this point. We want to talk about the use of funds. We have 125K in CMAQ, and the question is there a viable alternative to these CMAQ funds? And that's the area we need to explore.
Can I add something? This is Seattle Williams with the RPT. So to Linda's point, 5307 funding is to be used for capital purpose. So TDM wouldn't be eligible under that program.
Good point. Thank you for that. I am not sure that we're gonna.
Eric.
Yes.
Hey, it's Jason.
Yes.
Staff.
Please.
Yeah, I guess just to speak up on Stafford's point of view here. So I think there's a couple things going on. From Stafford's point of view, and I think, Eric, you said it well earlier, none of the municipalities wish to see GW Ride Connect put out by any of this. I think the focus that Stafford has had over the last 6 months to a year has been working very closely to free up as much CMAQ and STP funding to get it out to the capital projects, roads, things of that nature as possible. And we see this as another move in that direction. We do not believe Matter of fact, we've been very careful to reserve not only FY21 funding, but also to reserve, if you will, a fund balance over the next 5 to 6 years to ensure that there is more than enough funding to backfill any potential gaps that could open up. Now, that said, Stafford agrees very strongly that the other various sources, PL 5303, 5307, other indirect cost allocation adjustments could be used to better fund and more sustainably fund and more reliably fund GWRC, GW Ride Connect staff. Our concern moving forward is clearly STP and CMAQ funding is controversial and is very clear that that the FAMPO localities are very interested in getting as much of that money out on the road as possible. So our desire this year is to move GW Ride Connect staff and GWRC staff one step closer to a sustainable, regular source of funding that is not the subject of controversy every year. This comes up every year. It seems to be a repeated conversation every year, and we feel like this will help us move past that. So that's our position. In terms of the various subrecipient agreements, yes, there are still some hoops that need to be jumped through, no doubt about that. We're committed to working with GWRC and Ride Connect to make sure that those hoops are accomplished. And to whatever extent there are potential future gaps, Stafford's committing to making sure that we have those holes filled. But we do believe that it's very clear that we need to make sure that we're all doing our best here to work through all of those various funding sources first and foremost before just turning to CMAQ and STP funding. It's been a long time that we've been allocating a lot of CMAQ and STP funding to these programs, which are great, good programs, but it's time to take the next step as an MPO and we can walk and chew gum at the same time, is my point. I agree with the analysis that Spotsylvania put forward. Stafford agrees with the analysis in terms of being able to increase potentially the indirect costs if needed. It's clear too that there's a hybrid staff approach among some of the staff, so there's some other opportunities there too. But while I understand the concern, we've also been very, very careful to make sure that there's no immediate impacts to this, as in the next year, and that there's plenty of room to help calm any future potential impacts. So, I think there is a strong commitment from Stafford. I know I can speak from Stafford's point of view to ensure that GW Ride Connect continues forward. So with that, I'll leave my comments.
Thank you, Jason. Well said. Thank you. One point to keep in mind is that what we're dealing with this year is a certain amount of carryover of funds, rather substantial amounts, and so not just CMAQ and such, but 5303 and PL funding, et cetera. So there's a substantial reserve there that Jason mentioned. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that there is no immediate impact. The intent is to have time to figure this out while also addressing the concerns of the jurisdiction. So again, the intent is not to compromise GW Ride Connect, but to figure a way forward with this with these funds that we're sitting on today. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Hey, Eric, this is Lee Anderson.
Yes. Are you still there? Lee?
I just want to mention that GWI Connect staff could do work at, for FAMPO, then they're on supporting the program. So the program would suffer if work was taken away from it, if man hours were taken away from it. Thank you.
Right. No, we understand that. We don't want to compromise anything that GW Right Connect does. We just need to figure out how it can be funded, pressing on on CMAQ. So there is no intent to compromise the work, good work that gets done. And if suggestions will in fact do that, then we need to move on and figure out something else. So again, the intent is to keep GW Right Connect whole. Anyone else?
Hey, Eric, this is Kate Gibson.
Yes.
So I just wanted to kind of follow up on what Lee was saying and respond to Paul's suggestion that basically GW Right Connect staff could be lent to FAMPO. To Lee's point, that would require staff to stop working on the things they're working on now and start working on other things in order to be eligible under 5307. And so that does essentially cut GW Right Connect staff and increase FAMPO staff, which I'm not sure is what I'm hearing is the intent. I have not heard a suggestion yet that would allow us to use 5307 funding for GW Right Connect and keep our staffing capacity as it is now whole. As Ciara mentioned, it cannot be used for TDM work, which is what we currently use it for. The other thing I wanted to address were the questions about the FY20 budget. So that is correct. We've spent about half of the FY20 CMAQ funding. Part of that is due to not doing the marketing that we had planned to do due to the coronavirus. Some of that is also not spending as much staff time, not charging as much staff time to that program as we had originally intended. I will just mention that the FY21 budget has been significantly restructured to make sure that the funding is all being utilized by the end of the year next year. So we don't anticipate that being a problem in perpetuity. The only other thing I wanted to address were the comments about indirect. Those calculations have not been done. I don't know what the impact of increasing FAMPO staffing would have on the indirect cost, but I don't think that it would be $125,000 worth of savings for the GW Right Connect program. Actually, I'm certain that it would not be. So, respectfully, we would need more time to understand what that impact would look like. I just want to raise a little bit of a process concern. As Chuck mentioned, we're being asked to vote on something without other funding being in place to backfill the funding that's being proposed to be moved from GW Right Connect. GW Right Connect was not approached about this plan. We did not have conversations with Spotsylvania or Stafford about it. We were not approached by them about it until after the packet went out. And so, we want to come to the table and work together to see if there is a solution. We're certainly on board for trying to preserve funding for projects and being creative about how we use funding that's available to us. But I have some real concerns about the process and what that looks like, because I think there are some misconceptions about how 5307 funding can work. And I think we need to be at the table to figure that out before we start moving money around without really knowing what the long-term impact is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Well said. And again, to emphasize that there is no desire or effort to compromise GW Right Connect. This is a discussion that we need to have and appreciate the input. But the intent is, yes.
Sorry, it's Jason again. I want to respond to one thing, and Kate, respectfully, we've been asking for quite some time for information from GWRC to understand how the staff funding occurs. We can't seem to get that information out. So I guess we have been working with GWRC on trying to understand some of this, but we're kind of a little left in the dark here on how you all are funding the staff. And so I think our concern is this feels as if, from at least Stafford's point of view, that there's an expectation that the CMAQ funding will continue to just fill a hole that we don't exactly even understand how it's being used. And without clarity from GWRC on that, that's concerning from our standpoint. And I just want to make sure everybody's really clear on one thing. Again, this has no effect on GWRC staff, short-term or long-term. We have said we are very committed and remain committed to ensuring that GW Ride Connect remains whole. If in FY22 we decide to come back and reinstitute or replace some of this CMAQ or potentially STP funding, there is more than enough funding available to do that. So at this point, I don't think it's reasonable, without having all the information that we've requested on staff to moving forward, to continue to fund something that we're not clear on how it's being spent. That is our concern. And to the degree that we can work together, we're absolutely committed. And I've expressed this to Linda and others on your staff, that we believe, Stafford believes very strongly in the program GW Ride Connect. This is not an adjustment or a move to defund it in any way. We've been very clear about that, very clear about that. So I just want to remind everybody and rest assured that this does not affect the GW Ride Connect program. It does not defund the GW Ride Connect program. We are not, while we are adjusting the way it's funded moving forward and looking through that and committing to work with GWRC on that, make no doubt, I guess have no doubt that we are committed to moving this program forward. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Hey,
Thank you, Jason.
Eric, can I respond to that?
Excuse me, who's speaking?
Sorry, this is Kate.
Yes.
So I just wanted to respond to Jason's comments. I'm not sure what information you're looking for, Jason. I know GW Ride Connect put out a draft FY21 work plan that was presented to the policy committee at last month's meeting. We tried to be really transparent about how that money supports GW Ride Connect staffing, including the specific staff member positions that it supports and what percentage of their position it supports. If there's more information that you're looking for, I'm happy to provide it. I'm not sure that I was aware that there was information that you did not have access to, so I'm happy to provide anything that you need. The other thing I'll mention, I'll just also mention that the CMAQ money is not really plugging a hole. It was, you know, the off-the-top CMAQ is adopted as part of the methodology for scoring and, you know, allocating CMAQ and Rstp funding. So that's been a long-standing off-the-top allocation. It actually used to be $225,000 a year, and it was cut to $125,000 a couple of years ago. But that's funding that's been around for a long time as an off-the-top allocation, and that was a policy decision that was made as a part of that policy to support GW Ride Connect and TDM efforts kind of at a base level each year.
Thanks, Kate. I think I mentioned that we did have that long-standing relationship to provide a certain level of funding. I think, again, in that same vein, it's up for discussion. It just is, and I think it would be probably worthwhile for. And again, there's large amounts of PL and 5303 money immediately available, and so I think again that'll be useful for a couple of years. But I think it would be worthwhile for GWRC to evaluate how GW Ride Connect is going to be funded, how it could be funded, and let's make the case. Let's lay it out as to what level of CMAQ funding is absolutely necessary. because again, the policy is being discussed, and it would be worthwhile for you guys to make your case with all of these other factors that we're dealing with at this particular time.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
This is Michelle from VDOT. We'd like to weigh in with just a few comments, and,
sure.
and Susan can jump in on some of the funding issues as well. As most of you are aware from some email exchanges that happened Friday afternoon, VDOT was not really aware of some of this discussion that was happening, so we have not had a real chance to look at some of the implications of what is being proposed. As some others have brought up today, there are limitations on what can happen and what uses can happen and activities with certain types of funds. You keep speaking of their carryover funds from this year, the PL funds. There are some restrictions on uses with PL funds and what they can be used for and what they can't. Same goes with the 5303 funds and the 5307. I'm not as familiar with those funds because they're more tied to transit, but I know Sonali and Chuck have mentioned those as well today. Their big restriction is the TDM that has been mentioned during this meeting. Some of our immediate concerns are how this all ties into your UPWP. You have an amendment to the existing one, and you have the next year, the FY21, out for public comment right now, and what changes could be translated into those two documents. I know there are sections in both of those about TDM and GW Ride Connect. Both of those identify 5303 funds to be used for those programs. If you're asking us to approve something in a program that you're not identifying funds for, we can't really support that without a plan to identify how you're going to fund something on funds that may or may not come, because that's always a dangerous proposition. So I think we just need to have a little bit more information. Susan, I don't know if you want to add anything else about the fund types.
No, I just think we need to have a longer conversation on what the PL, the 5307, the 5303 can pay for by federal regulations. And I think we need to have a longer conversation about how some of the money was moved around and some of the projects that were added. I think a conversation needs to be held about that too.
Which projects are you talking about?
Well, the US 1 and Telegraph Road, that was never vetted. That never went through the process when they called for, when there was a call for applications. That project was never submitted, so I don't know what.
Right.
That is also not a CMAQ Rstp approved project.
Right. We understand that. That's why we have item 5A4 to do that.
Correct. And so what has happened is you called for applications. Applications were submitted and closed. They were scored, and now you've gone back and accepted an additional application, which I'd be honest with you, I don't know if that's going to be allowed under the federal regulations.
Good point.
Then this is Jason. That's not completely true, and I don't we're throwing around a lot of. I'll just say that there's a lot of kind of fear and stuff being thrown out here. If you look at 5307 funds, it's very clear that it can be used for transit-related studies, improvements, planning, engineering, all of those different things. There is no question about that. 5303 and PL funds as well are often mixed in for much the same use. It's also very clear that GWRC receives a lot of indirect fund allocation from FAMPO for their oversight of FAMPO. So the idea that, and to be frank, GWRC has been able to change those indirect costs before in the past, and there's nothing to say that it couldn't be changed again. So the idea here that somehow we're pulling out CMAQ funding without any replacement is just not true. In addition, we have left over $500,000 in STP money over the next 5 to 6 years, plus another couple $100,000 likely in CMAQ over the next 5 to 6 years. There is plenty of backbone beyond even the likely increases in 5303, 5307, and PL funding, not to mention the increases with the census coming up. I mean, the idea here that somehow we don't have funding, Stafford would not be on board with this if we weren't confident that there is funding there. Are there some things that we still have to work through? Absolutely, yes. No question about it. But again, we're committed to working through that with GWRC and FAMPO staff. In regards to the Telegraph Road project, yes, you're right. That is a new application. But to be fair, we are putting this in, and we've been talking about this for a couple months with FAMPO staff and you as well about allocating some STP and CMAQ funding to make up for the shortfalls that the state just came through with. These are things that we could not have foreseen last fall or even early this spring. The state made changes to the amount of money that they're giving to the localities, and it has an immediate impact in FY21. So we're feeling the burn here too, and we're reacting as soon as reasonably possible too. You know, I think what everybody's missing here is that overall, this proposal that we're discussing here, while I understand we still have some different things that we have to work through on this, we are proposing to bring more money to the table for FAMPO and GWRC overall. This isn't a decrease of overall funding to FAMPO or GWRC, it's a reallocation, but we are overall increasing the funding to FAMPO and GWRC. In addition, we're trying to get to a point where GWRC has a more stable revenue source that is not subject to a yearly allocation that may or may not be agreed to by the policy committee. When you look at the prioritization process, the 125 is never guaranteed. It's stated every year that is up for consideration. Stafford does not believe it should be up for consideration. Stafford believes that there should be a solid operating revenue source to ensure that continues forward, not based on something as volatile as CMAQ. So that is our position. So I guess while I understand people's sensitivities here, what I don't understand is why folks are so concerned about bringing more funding to the table, and why we're so concerned about not having a more stable revenue source. PL 5303 and 5307 is very stable, and in fact it'll be better, more money moving forward. So I'm really confused here why folks are so concerned about stopping something that is bringing more money and more stable revenue to the table. I don't understand that. That's it.
And this is Paul. We agree with Stafford, and I basically just want to add on that basically with regard to the FY21 budget, to go back to Michelle's question from a few moments ago with the UPWP, there's no change in UPWP funding being proposed as a result of these changes for FY21. We are supportive of the $125,000 for GW Ride Connect. We're also supportive of the $200,000 in Rstp for the FAMPO LRTP. We have support giving flexibility for basically that entire $325,000, that it could also be used in FY22 if it is not all used in FY21. I'll say with the LRTP, we are supportive that at least $100,000 of that $200,000 be used for FAMPO staff to build up FAMPO staff capacity, and that not all $200,000 of it be used for consultants. So that kind of consultant activities with that be limited to no more than $100,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. Again, we're feeling our way through here, and appreciate everybody's comments. Anything else? Yes, who's speaking, please?
This is Christine Hefner with VRE, and I'm a little reluctant to weigh into and further this discussion, but I'm just trying to understand the specific action we're talking about, how it relates to the action to deobligate some CMAQ funds that were allocated to a VRE project. And for that project, there's been no sort of replacement funding that I'm aware of identified, other than to ask VRE to consider funding it. So is that reallocation from the VRE project part of this whole package that we've just been discussing about and movement of funds?
Christine, this is Jason. We received an email from Rich last week stating that that you all were fine with not moving forward with that study. That's a study that affects the VRE stations at Brook Road, Leland, and Spotsylvania VRE station to consider multimodal improvements to those. And Stafford and Spotsylvania do not feel that there's a need for that study anymore at this time. And in discussing with Rich, he indicated that would be fine, that there was no opposition from VRE.
Okay, the information I received from Rich did not indicate that Stafford and Spotsylvania felt the study was no longer needed. It was asking whether VRE had the funds to carry out the study. So that's new information to me that I wasn't aware of. But I guess the other question is, just the first question is the VRE project rolled up in this whole reallocation that's related to this current discussion? But also, I thought somebody said that the issue is not that there is not available CMAQ or Rstp funding available. It's just that the priorities are shifting. I guess I'd like to understand why Stafford and Spotsylvania think that the VRE study is not needed at this time, because I wasn't aware of that.
Well, I'll say from Stafford's point of view, one of the stations, Brook, I've talked very closely with our supervisor in that area. She doesn't believe that there's any need for modal improvements there right now. It's a very remote station. There's not an ability to have pedestrian or bicycle facilities to a facility like that. In fact, you'd probably be taking your life into your hands trying to ride a bike or walk along either side of those roads. We have discussed, at least on Stafford's end, Leland. We're in the process right now of, we have a bond project that we're working on the Leland Road, in the Leland Road area, and we've been working with VDOT, looking at some various pedestrian improvements around that area. So at this time, we believe it would be redundant to study an area that we're getting ready to make other multimodal and transportation improvements to in the next few years. It may be that after 5 or 6 years, at that point, it may warrant further study, but at this time, we don't believe that, well, frankly, that a study would be late to the game at this point. It wouldn't capture the improvements we're getting ready to make. I'll let Paul speak on Spotsylvania's point of view on their station.
So I'll say with regard to the Spotsylvania station, it is pretty new. Basically, it was just completed in about 5 years ago, and basically it actually has a lot of kind of multimodal improvements already built into the station. So I guess we weren't clear that basically there would be a tremendous benefit in basically doing a study of Spotsylvania station at this point in time.
Okay, I mean, the study was intended to complement funding that's under a separate project for Fredericksburg that would look at all of the FAMPO area stations together and assess, where there are opportunities for multimodal improvements that may eliminate or reduce the need for parking expansion as a more cost-effective way to serve the stations. But if the jurisdictions don't feel that that's something that's needed at this time, that's fine. And VRE won't, we'll kind of monitor the situation, but bring it up for future discussion, as things go forward from an overall regional planning perspective. And just going back, I'm sorry I don't recognize names. Is that Alex who was speaking for Stafford?
I'm sorry, it was Jason. Thanks.
Oh, Jason, I'm sorry. And who is the supervisor that that felt that the brook improvements weren't necessary?
Ms. Shelton?
Okay, thank you.
Christine, this is Eric. The study you referenced, we've certainly been interested in, and we did benefit from the VDRPT study that was completed. And to your point about access, when the Lafayette Boulevard study resumes later this year, or actually pretty quick here, one of the issues we'll be looking at is the project we talked about a while back about direct access from Dixon Street to the VRE property that's currently being used for surface parking, but has potential to be more. Anyway, so from our perspective, we're still interested in moving ahead with certain aspects of the studies you referenced.
Okay, and then you'll be contacting VRE, and I'd suggest Sonali to just participate or provide input to that study whenever it resumes.
Yeah, sure. It's Michael Baker is going to be doing the study, and VDOT they'll be under contract with VDOT, so we'll make sure that Sonali knows what we're doing and invited to be involved. Absolutely.
Okay. Do you have an estimated start for that?
I don't. VDOT informed me that it would be June. I would suspect probably later this summer it'll get back underway. It was a project that was begun and then was interrupted by certain other jobs that had to be done.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this subject? Again, there's a lot going on. Yes.
I'd just like to make the final comment on my part.
Is this Chuck?
This is Chuck.
Is this Chuck?
Yeah.
Go for it,
man.
This
is Chuck. All right. I appreciate the commitments of the jurisdictions to see that GW Ride Connect is taken care of well into the future. I agree that having a sustained and sustainable, dependable, reliable funding source for everything they do is a laudable goal and a preferable path. But if it's not written down, if I cannot see it written down, all I can see is that money being pulled. That's all I can see. I think as the discussion goes on and a sustainable path is defined and codified, I would more than be willing to support it. But as things lay right now, because I can't see it in writing, because there's no real defined path for replacing those funds, I would not be able to vote for it.
Well said, Chuck. I think we're all on the same page here. Appreciate that. Chuck said those were final comments. Anybody else want to do final comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Jamie Jackson from Fred Transit. I just want to follow up on just this general conversation, and not to belabor the point, as I'm new to the region. But, you know, I do echo Chuck's point as far as what will be outlined from the future. I've mentioned that in previous conversations about CMAQ and Rstp funding. Since at this point, since Fred is technically a department of the city, we don't have access to those funding sources for CMAQ and Rstp projects because the jurisdiction basically is kind of in the first driver's seat to receive those funding. So I just want to put that out there, as I just don't have enough information, not saying I'm for or against. I understand what the needs are for the allocation of the funds for this section, but I do say my commitment in the future as we decide on how those allocations are done in the future to be a part of that process. So it doesn't belabor this issue, but it just I just want to put Fred's feedback into the process because moving forward, evaluating how we're included, because under this scenario and previous scenarios, any of those reallocations would not even be assigned to Fred. So that's my only comment, but thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. We've talked about this, and I appreciate you staying involved and keeping us honest. Thank you. Are we? I think we can address some of these things when we get to the resolution. It is a draft resolution, so I think we can tighten up things when we get to that point. In the meantime, are we okay with pressing on to the Stafford County's transfer request for Route 1 Enon Road? Sounds like we are. Alex, you ready?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So again, this is Alex from Stafford County. This is in regards to Route 1 Enon Road. I think as Jason might have mentioned earlier, we've kind of lost some revenue here with the recent taking away the state took away the state recordation fees and transferred most of that money over to Hampton Roads. So that's kind of lost our local funding we had allocated for the Route 1 Enon Road project. So we're requesting up to $1 million in Rstp funding to help make up for those shortfalls. And I guess I can go ahead and move into number 3, unless there's any questions on number 2.
Yeah, if there's no questions, yeah, please go into 3.
Okay, so this kind of builds upon that. So similar to asking for additional funding for our Enon Road project, we're also trying to seek additional Rstp funding for the Onville Road Smart Scale project, which we currently have application in for CMAQ funding, but we're also trying to seek Rstp funding. In addition, due to some excess STP funding looks like there's available, and again, the lack of the state recordation taxes there and the income from that, we're looking to make up some of that shortfall on our Route 1 and Telegraph Road Woodstock Lane project, which is an approved smart scale project as well. So looking to submit those 2 applications to have those scored and possibly receive funding.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. Anybody have any questions for Alex on these? Okay. The next item.
Eric, this
yes?
is Michelle again. Yes. I'm going to echo
yes.
what Susan said about your process for receiving RSTP CMAQ applications. I would just ask you to review what is your process for receiving these applications, what is your process that you have to go through for call
right.
for applications, your scoring. There has to be a process for that that's followed. So
right.
if you're introducing new projects, you have to have that same process that you always go through for your MPO.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. I think yes, we will. I'll ask the FAMPO staff to review, because we have to. We're taking this forward to policy, at least we're trying to. And I would ask the FAMPO staff to review and make sure if there's obvious gaps that we address those, because again, this is. We're trying to be supportive of Stafford County, but we also want to make sure we stay legal. So if we can do that, we'll take that additional step. Adam, you there?
Yes, Eric, I'm here.
Okay, let's take a look. We can do this cooperatively. Let's take a look at our procedures and make sure that we're staying on the up and up. And we can figure that out over the next couple of days.
So Eric, this was Paul. My understanding was Stafford was basically just requesting consideration from FAMPO, basically for funding for that project. So basically asking that it be rated, not that they were assuming that it was already rated. So my understanding is Stafford was trying to follow the process.
Right, exactly, and we'll just make sure that we've identified that we have done that or are doing that. We're just going to double check our policies.
And they're going to make sure that that project is CMAQ eligible, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, not to just introduce it, but to ensure it does it goes through what it should.
Yeah,
Anyway.
thank you, Paul. And Michelle, yes, to answer the question, I'm sorry, I was muted here a minute ago. Yeah, we brought this up about 2-3 weeks ago. Well, actually, I'm sorry, about a month ago, and started the discussion about it and realized that in terms of the original call for applications, we understand this was different, but this also came up as a result of other discussions about adjustments to the prior allocations that are being rolled. So, some of this is a timing issue that Stafford didn't create. We're just reacting to, and we're trying to make the request. So we've already given the request form over to the FAMPO staff. They're in the process right now of evaluating it. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Again, we'll look into this and make sure we're moving along as we should. 5A4, request to consider CMAQ applications for RSTP funding. Paul?
Good morning again. So this is a request that for the same 3 projects that FAMPO approved consideration for CMAQ funding, that those projects also be considered for STBG RSTP funding. On the 3 projects, basically in Stafford, there's the Unville Road widening project. In Spotsylvania, there's the Route 208 Lafayette Boulevard, Route 1 intersection projects, which is at 4 Mile Fork. And then there's the city project for Idlewild Boulevard VCR Trail Connector project. So for those 3 projects, consideration for available STBG RSTP funding for basically the FY 21 to 26 period or any available previous funding.
Any questions for Paul? None?
Eric, this is Kate. So that attachment, are those the scorings done by FAMPO staff?
Yes. Yeah, that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And this was submitted as part of the call for applications, or is this kind of the same issue that we've been discussing with the Stafford projects?
No, these were the ones that were submitted for, with the initial call.
Okay, thank you.
Right. The Stafford would be added to these. Okay. We are at the point where we need to take action on a resolution. There has been considerable discussion. My thought is, I mean, the transfer is kind of basic. However, we have had concern about the GW Ride Connect, so I was wondering if we wanted to add a whereas to the resolution indicating mention of GW Ride Connect and our commitment to fund that as what would be the word, as efficiently, appropriately, effectively as possible. Would something like that make sense to you, Chuck, to really put something in writing for that use, or would it be too much of a Band-Aid?
Hey, Eric, this is Lee, if I may.
Hey.
Yeah, I still couldn't support it because there wouldn't be a solid funding source in place, and that funding source be in writing. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, the issue I think we have is that GWRC really needs to go back and identify how it can make this work, so that it identifies the gap that CMAQ would be expected to fill. So I think without that staff work being done, we couldn't identify that source. So I'm
Eric, this is Jason.
Yes.
So just to be clear, what and I don't I'm going to just be direct about this. What GW Ride Connect is requesting is effectively a continued commitment, but of the 125 in CMAQ, regardless of what the prioritization process currently calls for right now. The prioritization process does not define that GW Ride Connect shall receive $125,000 a year indefinitely. It brings up on a yearly basis, and so again, what Stafford is supportive of is committing to ensuring that GW Ride Connect remains whole as a program. I would agree that we could add some language in here to commit towards establishing a stable and continuous revenue source for GW Ride Connect, and working with GWRC to that end. I don't believe that it is in anybody's benefit to continue to subject GW Ride Connect to such a volatile source of funding moving forward. I just don't see where that is beneficial. So while again, I understand everybody's concerns, at a certain point, we have to get out of this yearly debate of GW Ride Connect CMAQ funding, and I don't know of any other way to do it.
Eric,
Yeah, appreciate that, Jason. Who's that?
this is Kate. I just want to respond to that. So I don't understand why it is so volatile. I feel like it's written into the prioritization that we would get the off-the-top allocation, assuming that there is available funding and need. And I think we've demonstrated both of those things. My understanding is that for many, many years, this was not a volatile conversation at all. That was an off-the-top allocation that was made to GW Ride Connect each year. I think only over the last few years has it really become what it is now, and I'm not really sure why. And my understanding of how this works in other communities is that they do get the off-the-top allocation like we do, and that it's not a fight every single year. I guess my concern with, saying that we're going to move the off-the-top allocation in the out years and look for other funding is that, to my knowledge, there is not other funding that would be eligible to support the activities that the CMAQ funding is eligible to support. So I definitely hear the comment about there's more money now, but our guidance from PRTC, who is the direct recipient of the funds, is that it cannot be used to support GW Ride Connect staffing or marketing, which is what the CMAQ funds currently support. So, everything that I have heard to date is basically that those funds cannot be used to support GW Ride Connect. To my knowledge, PL and 5303 funds cannot be used to support GW Ride Connect. And so that's why we've been funded through the CMAQ funding for, the last several years. I don't know the whole backstory. I know the prioritization methodology goes back to at least 2009. Maybe somebody who's been around longer can shed more light on that. But again, to my knowledge, this has been an off-the-top allocation for many, many years, and only in the last, several years has this really become an issue.
Hey, this is Jason. Can I ask a question? How much indirect cost does GWRC receive from FAMPO every year, on average?
Off the top of my head, I do not know.
Just to be clear, what Stafford and I believe Spotsylvania are proposing isn't that PL 5303 and 5307 are directly going to support GW Ride Connect staff. They could be used perhaps if GW Ride Connect staff, as Paul mentioned earlier, were able to work on some specific FAMPO related projects. But assuming from your comment earlier that there's not capacity to do that, the question isn't whether or not PL 5303 and 5307 could be directly billed to for marketing and GW Ride Connect staff. The question is whether or not there's enough indirect costs from FAMPO to support that. And we believe that there clearly is, and that there's actually been many years of we're dealing with a significant amount of excess rollovers here. I guess, again, understanding that we have this significant amount of rollover that we're looking to reallocate this year, and moving forward, trying to find something that's going to be more stable and consistent. I don't understand why GW Ride Connect is concerned about removing in a revenue source, CMAQ, when we're proposing to increase the indirect contributions as needed from FAMPO to continue to sustain that. I don't. That is a more stable revenue source. So I'll just leave it at that. But I'm still confused as to why this isn't. Why this wouldn't be roundly supported by everybody.
So Eric, this
Thank you.
if I might.
Sure.
So I'm not really sure I understand the comment about indirect costs. I mean, basically just to make sure everyone's on the same page. All of our programs and all of our staffing pick up their portion of indirect costs based on our indirect cost allocation, and it's based on staffing. So, FAMPO, we charge indirect to FAMPO, but we also charge indirect to GW Ride Connect, COC, Go Virginia, all of the programs that we have in-house. So I'm not really clear on, yes, if we increase staffing, the indirect rate would go down, but it would not go down significantly, or at least not $125,000 worth. So I'm not sure I quite understand that argument. And I think that the issue is that we know that there's money available. The question is, what eligible expenses can each source of funding support? And to my knowledge, CMAQ cannot support GW Ride Connect directly. And so if you're talking about the indirect costs, again, I don't think that, I mean, first of all, we haven't been talking about increasing FAMPO staffing, so that's a whole separate conversation. And second of all, even if we did that, I'm not sure that would have as significant an impact on GW Ride Connect's budget as maybe you guys are thinking it would.
So Kate, this is Paul. One kind of comment basically with the FAMPO staffing, the EPWP calls for 7 positions to be fully funded. Basically, and kind of the FY20 EPWP was similar, but the actual full-time staff today, it's 3. There are talks of basically taking it down to 2. Basically, if there were 7 positions that were full-time, fully funded, that would generate a lot more indirect for GWRC. That's the argument.
So
I'll say if there was additional funding, if there were additional positions for FAMPO, that would help more.
So Paul, the budget that we have built for GWRC does assume the 7 positions, and there is a plan to hire those positions. And so the budget that we have built includes an indirect cost rate, and it still requires the 125 off the top CMAQ to support the GW Ride Connect program at its current capacity. So
we're getting way too far into the weeds. Let's not talk about staffing anymore. We're talking about funding and reallocating or repurposing some of that funding. So let's stick to that. We're not going to. The other is a good conversation, but not one for the technical committee. What I would suggest is that GWRC make its case, put together something, a short memo that indicates that indicates the issues that you're outlining. Kate, you're right. Way back when we allocated off the top a certain amount for CMAQ. We've done that consistently for a good many years, but that process procedure has been called into question, and so we have to be able to respond to that. So I think if GWRC could outline something indicating that a certain level of CMAQ is absolutely required, then please do so. That we've indicated, again, support for GWRC. We don't want to compromise GWRC. We don't want to do anything that's going to do anything to make your job harder. We are in the process, though, of talking about how we're going to how it should perhaps be funded. So I would suggest you put something together that makes that clear. But we're gonna have to press on again per directions we've received from policy folks. We're at the point of the resolution. Certainly, we would like to get support. My suggestion would be to add another whereas that includes language as Jason referenced, something to the effect that we want to ensure that GW Ride Connect remains whole as a program with a stable and continuous source of funding. Happy to wordsmith that any way you want, but I think a statement of support like that, I think it couldn't hurt. It certainly indicates our commitment, and again, there shouldn't be any question that we support GW Ride Connect. We're just in the process of having to figure out certain things because they've come up in a rather insistent manner. So is adding a whereas make sense to everybody, or is this just whistling into the wind?
Eric, this is Michelle from VDOT.
Yes.
We at VDOT don't feel that the second whereas, we don't feel that we have been collaborated with or worked cooperatively with on developing this exact proposal. So we would take issue with the second whereas.
Okay.
Because, and again, we don't take issue with coming up with a solution to this problem that keeps reoccurring. We just need to be provided with the information in time to review it, and it was not provided in a timely fashion for us to do so. We need to be provided with the information that shows where things are coming and going. All of these funding programs are passed through from federal programs through a state level agency, and so to say that there will be funds coming, if we don't know they're coming, I'm not sure how anyone else knows they're coming. So we need to be provided that information. So that's where we kind of are. We need more information on how these things will be funded, provided, what else.
Right, understand.
Michelle, are you suggesting that PL 5303, 5307, CMAQ, and STBG are no longer going to be sent from the federal government?
They're passed through funds.
Revenue sources.
Reimbursement.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
There's a suggestion here that PL 5303, 5307, CMAQ, and STBG are no longer going to be coming. Is that what I just heard?
No, that's not my. No, Jason, that's not at all what I said. I said that they are passed through funding sources from the Federal Highway Administration through a state agency to the MPOs. That's always how it's worked, and that's how it will continue to work unless Congress changes that.
Are we concerned that Congress is going to change that?
No, I have no concern about that.
Okay, well then I guess I don't understand why people keep bringing up that these revenue sources are somehow going to go away.
I'm not implying that they're going to go away.
Okay, well I think we heard differently.
You're talking about process, Michelle, right?
Yes, I'm speaking about process. I've never implied
Right,
they're going
right.
away. I'm just implying the processes, the rules and regulations in which you can use them.
Right. Okay,
Mr. Chair,
we are.
Mr.
I'm
Chair,
sorry.
this is Jamie Jackson from Fred. I just want a quick clarification for Michelle before, I know we're going to get to a vote soon, but is the statement from VDOT that potentially the allocation of these projects that are recommended to go into the prioritization process, that they may not be approved by VDOT because of where they fell in the process? I guess my concern ultimately is if VDOT is saying that the material came in after projects have been scored and ranked and prioritized within the VDOT system, or the applications have went in, that potentially, since it was not provided to you in the timely manner that you were looking for, that the projects may not ultimately go through. Can you provide some clarification on that before we move forward?
I think the only thing I'm trying to say is the information that's being presented to us right now for this vote has not been thoroughly reviewed. And that's where we are having a hard time supporting what is happening.
Right, right.
Because we haven't had enough time to review what is being proposed and the implications of what funds can be used for what activities. Everything that has been approved in the past is still okay. There's no changes to that. Does that make sense?
Right. Are you talking specifically to GW Wright Connect?
I'm just speaking to whatever the funds, that anything that has the CMAQ, Rstp, the PL, the 5303 that is in that UPWP right now that has been approved, that is in the CMAQ Rstp funding sheet that has previously been approved through the policy committee that's identified. It's just these changes, I guess it's the 13 transfer changes that we're being asked to look at right now.
Right.
For these transfers, that's what we're kind of having the rub with right now. That we just need a little bit more information on and need to understand where everything is going. And I know Susan has been working extremely hard to try to keep up with this, to provide information, to provide scenarios. And this one kind of caught everyone off guard Friday.
We appreciate everything that you guys do. That should never be in question. Aren't we running up against a deadline here, though? Don't we have to have a certain action taken by the end of the year, or do we have more time to spend on that?
No, you can. All funds can go. We can keep it as is, as it was last year, with any of the resolution changes throughout the year, and any additional funds can go to the balance entry.
Right. But we could also.
This is Paul. If I can just speak quickly. So one of the desires, I believe, with the localities is certainly a desire with Spotsylvania was to try to basically allocate additional CMAQ and STBG, RSTP funds that were available for smart scale projects. And I guess our understanding is that decision would need to be made basically before the smart scale final application deadline basically occurs, which our understanding is that is currently August the 3rd. So we were thinking basically MPO action would be needed no later than July if it's going to occur. So for the three basically projects that were submitted for CMAQ, and if they also go forward basically with the RSTP, the STBG RSTP, decisions would need to be made in the July timeframe. I'll say with the Route 28 Hood Drive project, that project is underfunded. It needs some additional funding for the right-of-way phase. I believe the deadline for that is more like the end of this calendar year, but since we were going through this process and basically funding decisions were being made, we wanted to basically put our project, which has a deficit, in basically at this time and not come back with a special request in the middle of FY21.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point about the smart scale. My thought is, and I again appreciate the comments, appreciate the good words by everybody. My thought is that this resolution, that we still want to move along this resolution, recognizing that there may be aspects that have to be modified. But I think at this point, we've put together a sound document, and I think in the interest of the jurisdictions involved and the scheduling, it makes sense for me to vote on a draft resolution, recognizing that we have time to tweak it if needed and to address issues of process and stuff later if need be. But I'm ready to take action on the resolution, although I would suggest we make the amendment that Michelle has asked for and pull out the reference to VDOT and add a whereas about the policy committee's or technical committee's commitment to ensuring that GW Ride Connect remains whole as a program with a stable and continuous source of funding. Does that make sense?
Adam.
Yes.
Just a couple thoughts here before we move to a vote, just from a FAMPO staff perspective. One thing that I'd like to echo that a few other people on the call have mentioned is that it has been the locality staff leads that have put this proposal together. And most of this information is also new to FAMPO staff as of this past Wednesday as we were putting the meeting packet together. So we would also support any allocations that need to be made in time for smart scale. I think at this point that FAMPO staff would not recommend this proposal in whole for approval. So that is one thing that I wanted to mention from a FAMPO staff perspective. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, Mr. Chair, if you do want to entertain a vote today, there is one mistake that we made in this and putting this together kind of at the last minute last week. The telegraph project here for line 30, as we noted here in green, this has not been scored yet. And the CMAQ allocations for 24 through 26 were placed here inadvertently. So that is a mistake in the spreadsheet that we would update if this is approved today. So that's just two things that I wanted to point out.
This is Jason.
Oh, good point. Yes.
This is Jason. Hey, look, all right. Stafford's getting a little frustrated here, but let me just speak very plainly about this. There is approximately $4 to $5 million of STP and CMAQ funding that needs to be allocated here. There's nothing new about that. There's been significant balance entries left in regionally significant projects and other categories, and significant balances in the next couple of years going forward that was unallocated. We're talking about allocating those funds to projects that have applications in and or are active projects. Enon is an active project. Route 208 is an active project. The the VCR connector is a new one, for example. Telegraph Road's a new one. We understand that there's a number of different applications here, but this is a normal process we go through every year to allocate CMAQ and STP funding. So, in addition, yes, this has been locality driven. We have had extensive conversations with FAMPO staff over the past month and a half to 2 months. We've also had conversations with VDOT about this, and we've asked a lot of questions, and we've sought for a lot of answers and data that's been hard to come by at times. But this is not something that's happened quickly or overnight. I guess what I don't understand here is the idea that now we're going to stick everything into a balance entry and continue to do a balance entry moving forward when we have projects out there right now that need funding on them. There's no question right now that we have projects out there right now that are short of funding, that need funding on them. And yet we're going to stick these into a balance entry and continue to sit on this without moving forward to fund those active projects. Telegraph Road is ongoing right now. Enon Road, we've already done preliminary design, and we have, I mean, from our standpoint, you know, I mean, Route 208 has overages that are in question from VDOT. So the localities are trying to work to make sure that we're keeping these projects moving forward and keeping them whole. And while we understand folks have concerns about moving these funds around, you know, a lot of funding dollars here. The CMAQ projects, we're moving CMAQ funds to approved CMAQ projects, for example. We're moving STP funds to approved STP projects, and those that aren't approved have applications in for them. So there's no question that we followed a process. We've submitted applications as called for in the prioritization policy. These are already in many cases federalized projects that CMAQ funds and STP funds can go on to. So I can appreciate that folks want more time to consider something, but from Stafford's point of view, we're out here trying to get these projects done and get them moving forward, and we need FAMPO's support to make sure that we're keeping these projects moving forward. I guess I'm a little frustrated by some of the what I feel has been folks who are somewhat inciting fear into the conversation. For example, that some of these funding sources perhaps can't be used when we know that they're actively used in other places, and it's pretty clear from the federal guidance that they can be used. We at a certain point, if we want to be able to move the MPO forward and continue these projects forward, we have to be willing to make some changes. And I don't understand why folks are insistent upon voting against bringing more funding to the table. That just does not make sense to me.
Thank you, Jason.
And Erica, this is Paul from Spotsylvania. I want to echo Jason's comments, and just to add that basically the policy committee did direct that the CMAQ funding be allocated for the 3 smart scale projects, and that the TAC leadership work with the FAMPO staff on that process. And we've had several meetings with Adam and the staff. I've been working very closely with them. I'll say basically with the Spotsylvania transfer request for the 772-500, we've also been working very closely with the FAMPO staff on that. We've also been working with VDOT on trying to develop the funding needed to address the shortfall on that project. I'll say I know that Stafford has also been working with VDOT and the FAMPO staff for the shortfalls for their projects for Route 1 Enon Road and basically Route 1 Telegraph Road. So we feel we've been working very well in the process for the last couple of months. And there is a smart scale deadline, which is basically the end of July, just to allocate funds for that. For the Rstp, STBG funds, basically requests for that basically would have to be authorized by FAMPO, basically for the 3 smart scale projects that were submitted for CMAQ. So we recognize that that hasn't occurred yet, but that's something we would like to move ahead with and try to get support for in time for smart scale.
Thank you, Paul. Question on the resolution. There's the reference to the $525,000 for Telegraph and Route 1. I assume that needs to come off until we've scored that project. Is that correct? Is that what you're?
If we need to pull that off for now to make everybody more comfortable, that's fine. But Stafford would like to continue forward with that application.
Understand. We're just trying to keep things straight so that we're trying. Okay. So it looks like yes.
This is Kate. So what I'm hearing is that these need to be in place by the end of July in order to meet the smart scale deadline. Could we not take this up at our July meeting for a vote by the policy committee in July?
We're kind of strapped. We're gonna vote today on a recommended resolution. It's not final action, and if the policy wants to wait, it certainly can. But I think we've got to give them something at this point.
So I'm just not sure why we need to vote on this resolution. I'm wondering, it sounds like there are a lot of notes and questions and things that need to be figured out. Like, did we follow the right process? Are these things eligible? It needs to go through VDOT review. I still, will maintain that all of the guidance I have received is that 5307 cannot be used for GW Ride Connect, even though, there continues to be some thought that that is eligible. And then, I also raised another question to Adam about some other calculations and things. So I'm just wondering if the action from the technical committee could be to review everything and take all of those comments to the policy committee, but I'm not sure why we need to adopt this resolution today and why we couldn't adopt something in July.
We're moving along. Appreciate that, Kate. But we're going to press on. We've got items that need to move along. There is time to address issues in July, but we've got to give the policy committee something from this committee so that they can move ahead as well. What we'll do is we'll remove the reference to VDOT in the second whereas. In the third whereas, we'll remove the telegraph and Route 1 item that will come later. And then I still think we should add a whereas indicating the technical committee's strong support of GW Ride Connect and our intent to make sure that that program remains whole. We're not, we're not talking about doing anything that would compromise that work. And then I think the number of allocations needs to be corrected. The third whereas has 13. The now therefore references 11. So that correction needs to be made. I'll leave that to you, Adam. But I think we need to move ahead. We're at we've gone through a certain amount of work. We've come up with some good numbers. There's certainly more to be done, but we're ready.
Hey, Erica, I just had a question for VDOT. I just wanted to check with them and see if the changes that the chairman, Eric Nelson, just said, do those address the VDOT concerns?
Paul, I'll speak to that. I have not gone through this. I found all this. I started reviewing on Friday afternoon, and I did not spend my weekend going through this. So I have not gone through this step by step. They were some highlights of my concerns, but I have not gone through it step by step. So I can't say it's all of my concerns.
So this is just a question for VDOT. Basically, our concern is kind of getting this amount of funding on these projects for the three transfers and basically the smart scale projects. In terms of the mechanics of exactly how that's done, that's maybe something that could be worked out later. But I guess we're most concerned with, like the 500, well, I'll say for the Route 1 Telegraph Road, we're saying we're not basically including that, but for the Route 1 Enon Road, the Route 28 Hood Drive, and for the three smart scale candidate projects, just allocating the amount of funding that we've identified. As Jason and others have alluded to earlier on this meeting, there is additional funding out there, both CMAQ and Rstp, which could be made available basically for other projects. But we just really feel that for these two transfers and for the three smart scale projects, we need to basically make decisions now. And one point I just want to basically add to that is localities, we're trying to decide how much local funding we need basically to supplement any other funding available for smart scale. And if we don't know that until the end of July, it may be too late just to get board action from our boards, basically just on local funding to be put forward. So from a timing standpoint, I just want to echo what the chairman, Eric Nelson, has said, that we really think a decision on the amount of funding being made available to basically for the two transfers for Route 28 Hood Drive and Route 1, basically Enon Road, and the 3 CMAQ projects being submitted for Smart Scale, that needs to be made today. So it can go to the policy committee in June.
Yep. Thank you, Paul.
But
Anyone
you're
else?
still taking you're still taking all of this money from all of these various projects that was on the spreadsheet that was attached to this resolution, correct? That's still the game plan.
Right.
And so it's not funding certain programs and projects and other things that, as Susan mentioned, hasn't been reviewed. Don't know how this may or may not impact the UPWP that's out for review right now. I know you've stated that it doesn't, but I don't know that. I'm not doubting you, but again, that's something that we're tasked with verifying.
I appreciate that, Michelle. Not quite sure how to respond, but I think again we're functioning under awkward circumstances, so that certainly doesn't help.
What does VDOT need to have? Do you have a list of questions?
Who's that, please?
Sorry, that was Jason. Is there clarity from VDOT on what exactly your questions are?
Anyone from VDOT?
Questions about, the questions were specifically what were the changes between the spreadsheet that was provided and the approved spreadsheet that had the last round of approved RSTP and CMAQ funds, and not just highlighting the boxes that changed, but the amounts of money. And then how does this directly impact the UPWP? Are there changes in fund types, fund allocations, task activities?
Most of the funding, and Adam, you moved around a lot of the funding. We worked together on this the last few weeks. The localities did with you. Most of the funding was in regionally significant projects, which was essentially fund balance. So I would say about 75 to 80% of the funding that we're allocating is just simply fund balance. There's really not, I wouldn't think, a whole lot of question about that. The remaining 25% was a mixture of a few different things. In particular, the UPWP mentioned moving forward that we were removing, for example, the, I don't know if you can put the project, I'm sorry, the spreadsheet back up. Thank you. In particular, in the top 5 columns, and I'm just going to bring it up on my end so I can see a little bit better. The LRTP support, as Paul mentioned, we left more than enough money in there to accommodate what GWRC and FAMPO requested. FAMPO public involvement had been highlighted by VDOT as something moving forward that could be considered for adjustment, and we've worked with FAMPO on that. That was something that they had suggested as well. Leased commuter parking spaces remains. It remains at a.
There's no money at all on the public involvement, correct?
Moving forward. Correct.
So is that not a federally required activity to have some sort of public involvement?
Hey, Michelle, this is Adam. Hey, sorry, Jason, can I chime in real quick? We're proposing in the UPWP to fund all of our public involvement activities with PL funding for FY21 and moving forward.
Okay.
The leased commuter parking reduced based on the 17 was what we understand is actually needed, not the 25 that was there before. we understand there's a question about GW Ride Connect support, which was the 125. We've left that in FY21. That has not removed. So the bike ped plan, so I think this is all the top 6 now. The bike ped plan was removed, and Adam, you may be able to speak better to that. I believe it's no longer active. They're no longer doing that. So all of those things, I don't think there was any question about that, other than I understand there's a question about GW Ride Connect support. And then we're moving it to projects Enon Road, Route 208, for example, are active projects that have already been approved. There's already applications, there's already CMAQ and STP funding on those projects. So it's not a question of whether or not we can move funding to those. I think there's a question in 26. Well, I'm sorry, we're still working on 26. We have applications in for that. Onville, 4 Mile Fork, I'll call it, and the VCR Trail are out in 26. That's all new funding. So we're not pulling funding from anything. That's all new proposed FY26 funding. And then the only other question at this point is Stafford. There's more than enough short-term prior and FY21 STP funding sitting remaining after all of that we're requesting $525,000 be considered in the near term for Telegraph Road Route 1. Even after all of that, there's $500,000 left, which is more than enough to support GW Ride Connect over the next 4 to 5 years if we absolutely come to that. But again, we would like to work with GWRC staff to first finish vetting out the PL 5303 and 5307. So, I mean, there's a lot of moving dollars here. I understand that. But, again, most of it is from projects and revenue sources that we've worked with GWRC and FAMPO and VDOT to understand are available. Susan sent over a spreadsheet last week that highlighted, you can still see some of the purple highlights up there on the spreadsheet everybody's seeing, that highlighted all of the potential revenue source, all the potential adjustments, areas that could be adjusted or considered to be adjusted. So we worked off of that in the final analysis. But I guess I'm not sure why there's been a lot of coordination on this.
Thanks, Jason. Any other comments before we proceed? I know there's concern. We share your concern, but we need to move on, and we will. Are we ready for a motion? Recognizing that the motion needs to reference the amendments that we want to see in the resolution.
So, Eric, this is Paul from Spotsylvania. I will make a motion.
Stafford will second.
Okay, and does the motion include removing the reference to VDOT in the second whereas, removing the telegraph in Route 1 in the third whereas, and adding a whereas to ensure GW Ride Connect remains whole as a program with a stable and continuous source of funding?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? All right. Let's see. We'll assume people are voting aye unless they vote no. So anybody opposed to the resolution, please indicate by saying no.
No.
Mr. Chairman, this is Stephen Haynes of VDOT, casting a vote of no.
All right. And who was the other no vote?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lee Anderson with GW Ride Connect, voting no.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chuck Steigerwald. I need to abstain from the vote because we may be handling it at the policy committee.
Very, very good. Thank you, Chuck. Okay. Other members vote aye unless you indicate that you're voting no. All right. The ayes do have it, barely, but they do. Thank you very much. Item 5B, FY21 FAMPO schedule update. Adam?
We had a quick update for the July FAMPO tax meeting. I think that we originally had this listed for July 13th in light of the July 4th holiday, but we did want to push that up to July 6th unless anybody has any major concerns with that proposal.
All right. Anybody have concerns? Okay. Thank you, Adam. Member reports. Are there members who desire to report?
Hey, Eric, this is Adam, not a member, but we forgot to include a staff report item here. So if it's okay, I'd just like to mention a couple things quickly.
Sure.
I did want to mention that Jordan Chandler has sent out a request to a number of the jurisdiction staff and a few of the agency staff for an update to some projects that are within a document that support our smart scale applications. And so if you happen to receive an email from Jordan early last week, if you would get any comments to her by June 16th, that would be great. And then also, I just wanted to mention for anybody who has not heard that the Chatham Bridge will be closed starting on June 22nd for that replacement.
Right. Thank you, Adam. Any other members wish to report? Where the hour is getting late, so I can understand if you
Eric,
don't. Yes.
This is Christine. Just a quick notice to everyone regarding VRE service that we are implementing additional social distancing guidelines and other practices, going forward as people start to return to work. I can send, if you'll let me know who to send it to, just a link to our webpage where we have a lot of information about that people might be interested in.
Sure. Why don't you send it to Adam and he can shoot it around to the roster. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other members wish to report? Any non-members wish to report? Okay. We're at the point where we will adjourn this Technical Advisory Committee meeting. The next meeting is July 6th at 9:30, and at that point, Alex will be the chair. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.